Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy, know y'all with me, let's get it, baby, Rockin' Royal.
Welcome back to another edition
Rockin'
of
Navy,
KSL.com Rockin'
know you
Royal
with me.
podcast, your
Let's get it,
podcast
baby.
for all those who rock the Y the right way. I'm Sean Walker, BYU beat writer for KSL.com. It is basketball season, and BYU is struggling. Men's basketball, women's basketball, they're both in a little bit of a funk on the hardwood. Let's start with BYU men's basketball, where BYU lost its third straight game since Big 12 play began, falling 71-67 to TCU this past Saturday afternoon in Schallmeyer Arena in Fort Worth, Texas. Richie Saunders had a game-high 26 points in the game for BYU, a game that featured 17 lead changes and 12 ties. Dallin Hall had 6 points and a team-high 6 assists off the bench as Kevin Young continues to search for answers for a team that has now lost 3 in a row and is just 1-3 in Big 12 play. Now, 1-3 in Big 12 play, not the end of the world. There's a little bit of nuance there because I think it's important to recognize that this BYU team started with a 20-point win over Arizona State. Okay, you had to get that at home. That's a good win right there. Then they followed that up on the road at number 14 Houston, a Houston team that really, for my money, is a top 10 team overall. What Kelvin Sampson's got down there, I think might be the best in the Big 12, or certainly one of the best in the Big 12. Iowa State and others probably have something to say about that. But Houston is right up there. So an 86-55 loss to Houston, it doesn't look good. But that one is what it is. It's not the end of the world. Where it really hurts is in the last week. BYU unable to score for the final 2 minutes of the game in a 72-67 home loss to Texas Tech. Red Raiders snap BYU's 14-game home court winning streak, first home loss since Kevin Young took over this past spring, and then followed it up with a 71-67 loss in Fort Worth to TCU, a game that, for my money, BYU probably kind of needed to have because it's a TCU team that was supposed to be roughly on the same level as BYU, at least in the preseason, if you buy into predictions and predictive hype and that sort of thing. So 3 losses in a row, not great. Is it time to panic yet, Cougar Nation? I'm not quite sure it's time to panic. BYU does host Oklahoma State tomorrow from the time of recording. That's Tuesday, January 14th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time in the Marriott Center and on ESPN+. That's when Oklahoma State will be in town. If BYU loses that game, then it might be time to panic for this young Cougar squad. Right the ship, and you may be able to get on a little bit of a run. But if you lose that game at home against Oklahoma State, then you go to Salt Lake City for a rivalry game against Utah this Saturday. You're at Colorado a week from Tuesday in Boulder, a Colorado team that also is struggling. But BYU could be looking at 5 losses in a row there. And then you're back home to host Cincinnati Saturday, January 25th, in what would absolutely become a must-win game ahead of a Tuesday night home game against a Baylor team that's currently in the top 25. So the next couple of weeks aren't necessarily a particularly brutal schedule, but they may tell us exactly what we need to know about this BYU men's basketball team. One that has been struggling both offensively and defensively in spells, certainly hasn't been able to find its shot in late game situations, and just doesn't really have a go-to guy right now. Kevin Young's admitted as much as there's not really somebody that kind of takes over in games. The closest thing they got right now is Richie Saunders, the Wasatch Academy alum. He's averaging 13.9 points per game in 14 games, all starts for the Cougars. He's played all but 1 or 2 games for BYU, but Yegor Demon's been a little bit up and down. His shooting is starting to come back, but you can tell he's still kind of recovering from that knee injury that he suffered against Providence, where he missed the rest of the non-conference play. He's averaging just 11 points per game, 4.1 rebounds, around there in assists. Cannon Catchings has been inconsistent. Fousseyni Traore, Foose, has probably been BYU's most consistent player, averaging 9.8 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. He's also come off the bench in all but 1 game for this BYU team. And I don't know if putting Fuson in the starting lineup is the change that you necessarily need with this team. It may or may not be. But Kevin Young, in speaking with the media Monday afternoon, he did say that he is willing to adjust and tinker and play around with some lineups and some different combinations to try to figure out what really is ailing this BYU team. Remember, this is a team that is still coached by a first-year head coach, Kevin Young. He's willing to admit it. He's still learning on the job how to coach in college basketball, how to not coach in the NBA. These are college students, even if it is a pre-professionalized atmosphere that he's trying to build there. So they'll go back to the drawing board. They'll keep tinkering, keep working, trying to figure out. They need to figure it out, in my opinion, Tuesday night against Oklahoma State, or things could get in a lot of trouble. Shout out really quick as well to the BYU women's basketball team. They're just 1-4 in Big 12 play. Struggled last week in a loss to Kansas State. Now, that loss to Kansas State, I'm not reading too much into it. They lost big, but K-State's probably a top 10 team. They were ranked number 12 at the time. They're ranked right around there right now. But shout out to BYU freshman Delaney Gibb, named Big 12 Freshman of the Week for the fourth time this season, after averaging 70 points on 40.7% shooting, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists, a block, and a steal in a win over Houston, and then the aforementioned loss to Kansas State. It's her fourth Freshman of the Week honor, like I mentioned, by the Big 12, and her third in the last 4 weeks. Those 4 weekly award honors, by the way, most by a BYU freshman in program history. So if you haven't gone out to the Marriott Center to see this BYU basketball team, this BYU women's basketball team, Delaney Gibb is absolutely worth the price of admission. She's going to be really good, and she's already really good, already exploding, already lighting up for this BYU team. So they'll be off here on the midweek and then head to Lubbock to face Texas Tech on Saturday. Catch the tip at 5 o'clock Mountain Time on ESPN Plus and BYU Radio. But before that, BYU basketball back home in the Marriott Center Tuesday night against Oklahoma State. And here's our conversation this week with head coach Kevin Young about what's ailing this Cougar team and whether or not a first-year coach can get the Cougars back on track.
Playing harder than the guy in front of you, number one. Just having a more of a consistent competitive spirit. I don't think that we're non-competitive, but I think some of our young guys have to understand that it's in every possession mentality with that grit that I'm talking about. And then part of grit and mental toughness is executing the game plan possession after possession. Those would be the two main areas.
As you kind of address this losing streak with the guys, what's the balance between wanting to just do things you do better and maybe changing something up?
That's a great question. It's one that I often reflect on. I've used this term with you guys before, but I'm constantly asking myself, are we on the right path? And I think the path for me is defined in a couple different ways. One is, are you playing the right guys? And if so, are you playing the right combinations of guys? That's number one. Number two is schematically, are you on the right path? And so the general answer to most of those questions is yes. There's some combinations that I'm still tinkering with that are holding us back. I got to get that right. The other part is keeping everything in perspective, and I think that's a really important message I want to share with our guys today. You guys have been covering sports a long time. You know how fragile sports are, right? And it's not. And I'm not saying this to try to, make myself feel better, but you're probably, and this is just the reality of it. You're one turnover less away from beating Ole Miss, who's a really good team, top 25 team. You're probably one made three away from beating Texas Tech at home, who went on and probably should have beat Iowa State, third best team in the country. You're one turnover away from getting a good road win at TCU. All of a sudden, you're 3-1 in the Big 12. You just beat a SEC team in November, right? But we're not. We're on the other side of that. And so how do we respond to that? How do we keep all that stuff in perspective, maintain our confidence, and understand that this league is tough. Nothing's given to us, but it is, it is very fragile. And so I think we have to keep all that in perspective while still trying to get, better and addressing the things that need to get addressed, and that's the challenge of a coach. But two, that's what charges me up. I can't wait for practice today. I can't wait to talk to my team, and I'm excited about this, getting through this difficult period of time.
Thanks.
Kevin, what were your thoughts on the groupings that you had out there at TCU when you broke down the film, and how did you feel that rotation kind of performed in that game?
Yeah, it was tough. If I had to do it over again, I would have probably just left Trevin out there, even with 2 fouls. It was hard to get a sense of that quote-unquote starting group because he only played a minute and 20 seconds into the game he gets his second. I took him out. So, hard to say with that initial lineup. The lineup that I did really like was, Dallin, Trevin, Richie, Mawut, and Foose. That was the group that really pushed us to a nice little run there to end the first half. So what's the commonality with that group? You got a lot of veteran guys out there that know what they're doing, right? So our young guys can learn from that, learn from the attention to detail that those guys played with, and the necessary competitive spirit, consistent possession after possession is ultimately what those guys did. And so that's something that our young guys can learn from. But we're still a work in progress on learning, the groups, which is a hard thing to say, 15, however many games into the year, but that's just where we are.
And one of those veterans you noted, Richie, when you were recruiting him back to BYU out of the portal, were these performances that you've seen in Big 12 play what you envisioned for him this season and kind of your pitch to get him back to BYU?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's as talented as any wing in the country. I really believe that. I've been steadfast about my opinion on him. He's made of the right stuff. He can shoot the ball. He competes. He's got to sometimes compete less and think more on the defensive end, but that's, I think, growth for him. But yes, it is what I expected, and he's answered the call so far. Now I think the challenge for him, it's different when you're a guy who's, not the number one guy on the scouting report. All of a sudden you're the key guy. Now can you still get things done even when they're keying to stop you? And that's a challenge for him, and that's a challenge for me to continue to try to put him in the positions to, get the same types of looks when things are ratcheted up against him.
All right, we'll go with Matt and then Ron.
Coach,
Are you on a treadmill right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey man that's efficient with his time.
Why not? Like these meetings, why not do 2 things at once,
I like it.
Hey, with Diego, before his injury, statistically, he was better than he has been post-injury. How does he get out of this kind of slump that he's in right now? Yeah, no,
it's something I think about a lot. Watching a lot of film, a lot of discussions with him and just people around him. You got to go through it, man. Sometimes the only way to go through it is just to go through it. I know that's super cliche, but, I think his shooting woes are probably weighing on him. I think he's in the last 2 games, outside of that last shot that he took at TCU, I think he's taken more of the right shots. I think he's in a pretty good rhythm offensively as it relates to just his attacking. He had a couple uncharacteristic turnovers that I know he'd want to have back, but he's got to go through it a little bit. I think some of these grouping changes that we're making will help him, and I expect him to bounce back. The one thing I love about him is, man, none of this has deterred him from working. He's one of the first guys in the gym. He's always in here early working on his game. He's extremely prideful. He wants to play better. And, you got to kind of go through this difficult period of time and just kind of get on the other side of it.
You referenced earlier the close losses, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, TCU. What has stood out to you late game execution-wise in those games that have maybe prevented you from getting wins?
The commonality between the 2 out of the 3 is turnovers, some untimely turnovers on the offensive end. From a defensive standpoint, I got to do a better job of putting the guys, in position to get the ball out of guys' hands. That's been a commonality in those 3 losses. Some of that's execution-wise, where we just flat out didn't execute the game plan. Other parts are, could be a bit more aggressive, particularly with ball handlers. But our pick and roll coverage against Reynolds was actually pretty good in that game. We had just got 3 or 4 stops in a row with the same coverage we rolled out for game winner. he made a heck of a play, so you got to give him credit for that.
Yeah, Coach, as Richie Saunders started to emerge as the go-to guy down the stretch, I know a couple of post games ago you talked about Foose, but has Richie started to immerse himself and separate himself as that guy?
I think he's certainly earned that right. I went to him late, where he stepped out of bounds. That was just again matter of inches. I thought he probably would have liked to have seen him try to hunt a shot in that situation a little bit more. But yeah, I think he's earned that right. I have a lot of confidence in him there. Now it's just a matter of making sure we're putting him in the right position to do that. Foose is still a guy that we want to play through. He makes a lot of really good decisions with the ball in his hands. If it's one-on-one or if it's double team, I thought he made some really great passes out of the post. But yeah, he's a guy that we can play through, and still trying to find the right spots to put Richie in to be able to do what he does there late game.
All right, we'll go Jay.
Yeah, Kevin, I just want to ask you about Keba Keita with the Utah game coming up at the end of the week. Are you pleased with his progress and his improvement this year and from over the course of halfway through the season?
I am. Yeah, I think defensively he's been really good. He's been able to protect the rim for us at a pretty high clip. His rebounding started off extremely well. I thought it for a couple game stretch it wasn't where it needed to be. Thought it was better last game, but yes, I think he's improving. I think he's continuing to get better, and wanna see him just play with an edge, a dog type of mentality. Because I think when he plays that way, he's a totally different player.
And then how is Cannon Catchings kind of handling his freshman year as far as, we all see the ups and downs freshmen always go through. How's he handling that and dealing with that?
Cannon's one of the most coachable guys on our team. I love coaching Cannon because if I tell him something, he really locks into it. He's going through a little bit of a tough spell right now. I think his defensive intensity has to pick up. I think offensively, efficiency-wise, he's made strides. I think he's taken the shots that are good shots for him. Want to continue to see him hunt threes off the catch. I think his closeout attacks have been better. Really, it's just a matter of him being able to, as I mentioned before, have that consistent competitive spirit on the defensive end, and then be able to execute, the defensive coverages, at possession after possession. So that's part of growing pains. I mean, I think we all, as you mentioned, we all see his upside. I think his defensive upside is just as high as his offensive upside, and he'll realize it. We're just trying to, hope that it's fast-tracked a little bit more than it is at the moment.
Let's get it, baby. Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy. Know you with me. Let's get it, baby. We going long like a cougar tail. Defense hitting hard like some seashells. Get into the green. I ain't talking kale.